Facets was not planned to have a biosemiotic perspective, but inevitably it is having one. The face, indeed, is a study area where many dimensions converge, from culture to society, from psychology to biology. The face is a biosemiotic device, yet this is probably a pleonastic statement. In this paper, in this presentation, I would not like to limit myself to generically affirm the biosemiotic relevance of the face. Instead, I would like to point out two issues about the face that to me are absolutely central and at the same time take a completely different dimension if they're studied from a characteristically biosemiotic point of view. Characteristically biosemiotic means, at least to me, that the meaning of the face is considered as influenced by the phylogenetic evolution of the human species and the ontogenetic interaction of its members with the environment, other humans, other species, the Umwelt. I should point out, however, that I did not develop this biosemiotic dimension and studied the relevant literature out of direct interest in the biology of the face and its connection with meaning. I should rather say that I came across biological and biosemiotic literature about the face starting from a series of philosophical problems which were not initially formulated in biosemiotic terms. In other words, I'm not a laboratory guy looking at philosophy. I'm a philosopher, a semiotician peeping into laboratories. So the first issue is at the center of facets. I could call it the issue of singularity. One of the hypotheses that I develop in facets, indeed, is that digital communication is not changing the overall meaning of the human face, but it is altering a specific aspect of it, that is, the connection between the human face and the meaning of singularity. In a nutshell, this connection can be described as follows. Every time we see a face and every time our face is seen, that normally gives rise to the idea that that face is unique and that is attached to a unique personality. Behind the face, that is, we posit singular emotions, thoughts, and intentions. The digital transformation is perhaps eroding the connection between the human face and its meaning of singularity. Before investigating such erosion, however, and before seeking to understand whether it is taking place or not, one should clarify what singularity means and how this value is attached to the human face. Omitting such preliminary inquiry may indeed lead to stereotypical jeremiads about the moral evil brought about by new technology. We don't need that. So reflection on face and singularity must start from the incontrovertible empirical evidence that all faces are biologically different. They look different in most circumstances, but above all, they are morphologically different. Even in the case of identical twins which share an identical face genotype, their phenotype is systematically differentiated by random asymmetries that take shape already in a maternal womb and become even deeper afterwards. The human species shows a large variety of facial genotypes, which gives rise to an even greater variety of facial phenotypes. At the same time, such variety is usually such that faces can nevertheless be recognized as faces, although they all look different from each other. Dramatic alterations of the morphology of a face must occur before it can no longer be recognized as a face. Human beings are particularly skilled at determining whether a visual configuration corresponds to a face and at discriminating among different occurrences of it. So the first question is why? Why such a variety? Such question must be divided into two related issues. First, why there is so much genotypical and phenotypical facial variety, and second, why humans seem to be extremely keen on spotting it. These two questions, and especially the second one, are eminently biosemiotic, at least to me. They bear on how some natural characteristics of the human species become key in processes of meaning production and on how, in turn, such processes transform the interaction between these characteristics and the environment. An answer to the first question might be, so why such a variety? The answer might be, why not? After all, morphological variation is present across nature in all spheres, deriving from exponential combinatorial interactions of elements in the Umwelt. The core issue here, therefore, is not variety. There are no two identical rocks, as there are no two identical leaves, as there are not two identical faces. The core issue here relates rather to the second question above: why does the variety of faces stand out? For it stands out not only socio-culturally, but also biosemiotically. As an ample literature demonstrates, human brains are specialized for the identification of facial images, and what is even more striking, are specialized for the recognition of singular faces. In other words, if singularity is across nature, why for the human species it matters, especially as regards the face. So I should now quote some articles that spurred my reflection in this field, many of them published in the excellent Biosemiotics. The first one is Face Recognition and the Social Individual by Louis Goldberg, published in Biosemiotics in 2013. It's a good technical article. It describes the processes that enable a unique face pattern to be represented as a percept in the visual sensory system. To me, the crucial word of the article is micro. On the one hand, of crucial importance for biomarker identification is the existence of a microanatomical structural level in which every iris and face is morphologically unique. On the other hand, I quote, "It has been proposed that prosopagnosia results when damage occurs in the intermediary nuclei of the microcircuits that link the face representations and the memory stores, since it has been demonstrated that the visual sensory system and the rostral temporal cortex, the memory stores, are functional in the prosopagnosiac." It's a wonderful article, I really recommend it. In other words, Goldberg, 2013, proposes that, I quote again, "an analogy can be drawn between the macro and microstructures of the face and iris and the macro and microstructures that are involved in the transfer of information from the representations in the primary visual sensory system to the temporal cortex memory stores." So faces are variant anatomical microstructures that activate cognitive microcircuits in face recognition unless something goes wrong, and we have, of course, prosopagnosia. In a subsequent paper, The Codes of Recognition, also by Louis J. Goldberg and Leonard A. Rosenblum, also published in Biosemiotics in 2014, this article suggests that the relation between these two levels of microfeatures is not direct, but coded through an adapter. It's a very interesting concept. It is not very well defined in the article, I think, but it is a very interesting concept. The eye itself is the structural adapter that embodies the rules of the code that implement the correspondence. So a third article I would like to call attention to is Face Recognition Not So Unique After All? By Isabelle Gauthier and Nikos K. Logothetis, appeared actually many years ago. I'm sorry that I hadn't read it before, in Cognitive Neuropsychology, but this is a consequence of studying a new object. You come across a new literature. The article, as I said, is not new, but the connection that it ignited in my research is novel. So to me, reading this passage in particular was mind-blowing. I quote it: "Behavioral work in humans suggests that non-face objects may be processed like faces if subjects are required to discriminate between visually similar exemplars and acquire sufficient expertise in doing so." End of quote. It seems that the encoding scheme used for faces may also be employed for other classes with similar properties. Thus, regarding their neural encoding, faces are not special, but rather, as these authors claim, is the default special class in the primate recognition system. To me, this was a revelation, reading this article, because it provided empirical evidence for an insight they have philosophically developed throughout facets. The meaning of singularity is key in the interaction of human faces. A Franco-Lithuanian philosopher, Levinas, made it the pillar of his ethics. But subsequent philosophers, Deleuze and Guattari, Derrida, Haraway, Kocha, Aloa, inquired, what about the faces of non-human animals, of non-mammals, of plants? So perhaps the value of singularity and the ethics that stems from it, that we humans usually attach to faces, does not depend on them, but on how we biosemiotically see them. By default, we treat faces as unique, Yet this same biosemiotics and semio-cognitive process can be projected onto other objects. On the one hand, we can learn to visually, cognitively, and ethically treat other objects as if they were faces. On the other hand, we can deface faces and treat them as if they had no distinctiveness. So, another article I found very interesting. I think the author is in the Congress. It's morphological uniqueness, the concept and its relationship to indicators of biological quality of human faces from Equatorial Africa, published in 2021 in Symmetry. And I particularly enjoyed the conclusion of this very clever methodological proposal, which I quote: "Morphological uniqueness has the potential to be generalized and applied beyond the realm of human faces. Future studies may explore whether and how MU is associated with the genomic signatures of natural selection that underlies local adaptations. It can be used to explore any formal aspect of any organisms or their parts and find application within comparative biology and beyond, for instance, in the study of cultural evolution of human artifacts." So, as I said before, on the one hand, we can learn to visually, cognitively, and ethically treat other objects as if they were faces. The interesting biosemiotic aspect is that by doing so, we literally change the way our brain works. And biosemiotics and cognitive semiotics, together with theoretical morphology, are developing methodologies and instruments to actually measure the centrality of distinctiveness in the functioning of a brain, in the behavior of the human species, but also in the making of the factual variety of the Umwelt. We now know better how our species treats the uniqueness of shapes in the Umwelt, and even train our brain for distinctiveness in a certain visual domain, which is a cultural choice with ethical consequences. And let me end with another picture from Prague. If we look attentively, even glasses may all look different from each other. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Massimo, and we have time for 2 short questions or 1 big one.
Yeah, thank you very much. So, but have you paid attention that before, for humans, faces became so important to distinguish as unique landscapes were had the same function or the same feature, landscapes, and not only for humans but for birds?
Thank you for this question, because it allows me to stress the fact that, of course, there is a cultural dimension in this centrality of the face as a standard object for singularity. You can see it also in the comparison between, let's say, Western and Eastern aesthetics. You know, the Eastern aesthetics, the aesthetics of China, for instance, develops the genre, the pictorial genre of the portrait very late in the 17th century, in the 18th century. For a long period of time, the most important singularity for Chinese aesthetics was exactly the singularity of the landscape. So that shows that, of course, there is a sort of a inclination of attaching singularity to faces, but this singularity developing and singularity discovering a process in the human mind is probably projectable onto other visual configurations, including, of course, landscapes. Yeah.
So maybe I will save the time and speak up. Thank you. I like what you are doing, not just because you're advertising my paper, but I absolutely agree, that the crucial question is about the variation or variation of the faces and so on. But maybe we should modify this question like, what is the difference between the variation in faces and variation in the rest of the body? Because there is the evidence that the fish are much more variable and less integrated in other body parts. So
Yeah.
So which is a little bit, okay. So what kind of, how do you define face then? Is it exposed surface, or is it just or some social organ? Because the flowers or blossoms are probably not faces, but maybe they are. That's my question.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I would say that we shouldn't probably go for a definition of a point, but for the definition of a range. So, in a very broad conception of the face, which wasn't yet the definition given by Levinas, but could be, for instance, the definition given by Haraway. The face is a visual configuration to which we attach uniqueness, and as a consequence from which we derive the concept, or at least the feeling, of an alterity, of an otherness. But this is a very broad definition, which includes, for instance, non-human animals to which we would recognize, and this is also, I said before that this started from a philosophical question connected with my vegetarianism, So why do we say that animals have muzzles? And why don't we say that they have faces? Well, it depends on how we articulate that visual field, because as soon as, for instance, we interact professionally with some animals, we start to discriminate, among their, let's say, muzzle or facial features. But even simpler, in simpler terms, as soon as we have a pet, so as soon as we have a cat or a dog at home, that is not a muzzle for us anymore, is a face. And I don't think that is only connected with the emotions that we have towards this pet, this non-human animal. It is also connected with the fact that our interaction face to face with that animal probably increases in us our capacity for discriminating the uniqueness of that muzzle, in relation to other muzzles. So, on the one hand, you would have this very broad definition, and on the other hand, you would have to take into account that in the development of the human species, probably one visual configuration became particularly important in the interaction among members of the species. And this configuration was not the nostril, for instance. All nostrils are different, but we still don't use them for automatic recognition, although we could. We could invent some software that recognize human beings from their nostrils. Software has been invented for recognizing human beings from ears, from fingerprints, from faces. But faces, exactly because of the biological history of our evolution, have taken a very prominent role, which can be culturally reversed. Tuaregs in Africa, they all go around veiled, except for kids and the chief. There is a very good literature about it, anthropological literature published in the 1970s. In that case, of course, the face is culturally withdrawn as a visual configuration for determining singularity and attributing otherness, personality, and status, and other visual elements become more prominent. So in this particular culture, capacity of discriminating among different shapes of veils, for instance, becomes extremely proficient. But the interesting thing from the, let's say, point of view of biosemiotics and cognitive semiotics is probably the fact that the part of the brain that discriminates among veils is not different from the part of the brain that discriminates among faces. So veils are treated like faces.
Thank you. Talk to you later.
Okay.
If you would like to stay for last question.
Just to make a wonderful presentation, just make the obvious point. Face is the locus where most signs are produced for the organism. Of course, we in primates have evolved to pay particular attention to it. Sounds are coming from the face, eye gaze, which is crucial for attraction, is coming from the face, muscular configurations reflecting intentionality is coming from the face. From a biosemiotic viewpoint, it makes perfect sense that so much of our cortex and our cortical processing is devoted towards a microanalysis and an focus on the face as opposed to the side of the arm, or the back, the elbow. This is where the signs are coming from. Of course, evolution is going to focus on that and equip us more and more to attend to it.
Yeah, there's definitely some evidence about it, about the fact that especially with the transformation of our posture, the face has become much more visible and much more displayable and displayed. And as a consequence, that has changed also the way we use the face, because the muscles have started working in a different way. So they weren't used to hold our head, they were used to actually move our face. But there is also, that's why it's very interesting to combine biosemiotics with cultural semiotics. There is also a cultural dimension to it. I mean, we again have to take into account that in some cultures, a student talking to me would never look at my face, would look at the ground or would look at his feet or her feet. So there is that prominence, of course, but it is definitely inflected by culture as well. Again, in some cultures, although it is a very prominent surface, visual surface, it is somehow put at the margins exactly because of its centrality. So.
Sure, but you might want to look at that notion that who gets to give the signs? The teacher, the authority, the male. Who doesn't get to give the signs? The veil, the student, the lesser. Right? It is a originating site of science.
Yeah, but I wouldn't go for a deterministic relation between, let's say, the possibility of disclosing the face or displaying the face and power, because again, in some cultural contexts, it is exactly the opposite. I don't show my face to you like God because I'm above you. And well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Massimo.